This is your Age of Liberalism lecture. This is going to be a very brief lecture because liberalism is a fairly straightforward topic. Liberalism is the opposite of conservatism, which we will discuss in another lecture. Here is a brief definition of liberalism. It is a political or social philosophy advocating the freedom of the individual, parliamentary systems of government, nonviolent modification of political, social, or economic institutions to assure unrestricted development in all spheres of human endeavor, and governmental guarantees of individual rights and civil liberties. That last part that states individual rights and civil liberties is very key in liberalism. Liberalism has its roots in the progressive era. We've already discussed reforms that took place during the progressive era, such as economic reforms, the Federal Income Tax Amendment, the Federal Reserve Act. There was also the Clayton Antitrust Act, which strengthened the Sherman Antitrust Act. There was the Federal Trade Commission that enforced the Clayton Act. There were social reforms, such as the Adamson Act, which established an 8-hour workday for railroad workers. There was the Seamen's Act, which eliminated old age abuses of merchant sailors. There was the Workman's Comp for federal employees. So, progressivism meant hands-on government. Not laissez-faire government, which means hands-off government, but direct government involvement in business and in, to some degree, the private sector. Then a couple decades later, we had the New Deal, which included recovery, relief, regulation, and reform. Recovery was the National Recovery Administration, or the NRA. We had the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which helped farmers get on their feet. It paid farmers not to plant. We had regulations, which included the FDIC. We had the SEC established to regulate our financial system. The reform, such as Social Security. So again, very hands-on government. Congress passed more legislation between 1964 and 1972 than in any other period since the 1930s. The bulk of legislation was passed between 1965 and 1966. Of course, there were also opposing views of liberalism. For example, the conservatives. They opposed the expansion of federal government. In other words, they believed more in this hands-off government, this laissez-faire form of government. Conservatives believed in law and order. They looked down on welfare and were resistant to civil rights, particularly civil rights legislation. Another opposing view was the anti-Vietnam protesters. They were opposed to liberalism because they felt this was too slow of a process. Liberals were in favor of new programs targeting civil rights, ending poverty, and extending welfare. President Lyndon B. Johnson will create a program called the Great Society. And what he said was this: we have the opportunity to move not only toward the rich society and the powerful society. The Great Society rests on abundance and liberty for all. It demands an end to poverty and racial injustice. So examples of Johnson's Great Society was the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Women will also be a part of the liberalist idea, such as the women's rights movement and other social movements that we will talk about at a later date. So that's liberalism. If you have any questions, please let me know.